everyone, and thank you for joining me today in the first part of a two-part webinar series, Microscopic Basics Part 1, Theory and Background. My name is Natalie Walton, and I'm a microscopist here at Aquafix. I use microscopy to help wastewater plants determine the overall health of their system, if and why they're having issues, and recommend treatment if needed, all based on my observations. Today, I will touch on what I look for during my analysis and some of the basics of wastewater microbiology, such as floc health and sludge age, Protozoa and Metazoa, Filamentous Bacteria, and what they mean for your plant. For an even deeper dive into the topics I'm going to cover today, you can join me September 28th for Microscopic Basics Part 2, Microanalysis in Practice. During this webinar, you will be provided links to Aquafix's F to M calculator, our microscopic analysis services, and our organism database, all of which can be accessed at any time for future use. To start, it's important to remember that wastewater treatment is a biological process that's composed of a plethora of microorganisms. These microorganisms can be broken down into three different groups: bacteria, protozoa, and metazoa. The first group, bacteria, are the most abundant and will contribute to 95% of your total biomass. Bacteria are vital in the wastewater treatment process as they're primarily responsible for nutrient removal, BOD reduction, and can be an indicator of treatment conditions. Bacteria can be further broken down into more specific categories: free bacteria, flocculated bacteria, and filamentous bacteria, all of which we'll be expanding upon later. Protozoa, our next group, make up 4% of your total biomass. They're responsible for consuming algae and bacteria, as well as aiding in effluent clarification. Protozoa can also be used as indicators towards the health of the treatment system. The final group, metazoa, will only make up 1% of your total biomass. They're primarily in charge of protozoa and bacterial consumption, as well as indicators of treatment conditions. So, as you can see, these three groups all play important roles in the foundation of wastewater treatment. Not only are they important in the treatment process, but these three groups also provide an indicator towards the efficacy of your treatment process, overall biological health, and any potential issues occurring within a plant. Some of these potential issues can include incoming toxicity, nutrient imbalances, septic conditions, bulking and foaming, as well as mechanical issues. That's why Aquafix uses microbiology as the primary tool in finding the most effective treatment solutions. We believe understanding the microbiology of a plant is fundamental in discerning what problems are present and why. During our analysis, we start by looking at floc, specifically floc structure, sludge age, oxygen penetration, and extracellular polymeric substance levels. We then quantify and identify metazoa, protozoa, and filamentous bacteria. And then through these observations, we're able to discern what may be happening in a plant, why it's happening, and provide educated treatment recommendations. For our analysis, we use a Nikon light microscope with a 4, 10, 40, 60, and 100x objective, as well as phase contrast. However, for basic analysis, if you're just starting out, a 10, 40, and 100 are just perfect and are enough. We then prepare our samples on a glass slide and cover them with a cover slip. We also use India ink stains to help determine floc strength, as well as Gram and Neisser stains for filament identification. One of the main components we focus on when determining the overall health of a plant is the sludge age. Knowing the sludge age within a plant is important, as many aspects of a plant's microbiology are a direct result of the age. Many factors help us determine the approximate sludge age within a plant, such as bacterial population, metazoa and protozoa, and overall floc health. Throughout the presentation, I will be referencing this diagram to help demonstrate how they connect. It's important to keep in mind other factors, such as environmental and mechanical issues, can influence these characteristics. Therefore, when determining a plant's overall health, it's important to analyze more than just the sludge age, because alone, it may not be a clear enough indicator. Floc formation occurs when free bacteria grow and develop while consuming nutrients. And then, under ideal conditions, bacteria begin to produce and secrete flocculating agents, mainly extracellular polymeric substances, or EPS. These flocculating agents then allow bacteria to stick together and form floc. The degree of flocculation can be connected to sludge age. At a young sludge age, high levels of free bacteria will be present, thus resulting in low levels of settling in a cloudy effluent. This is because bacteria need adequate retention time to begin the floc formation process. As sludge age becomes older, we begin to see floc form as free bacteria reduce nutrients, grow, and release flocculating agents. Bacteria are now able to begin settling, and there will be a less turbid effluent. Once we reach a healthy sludge age, ideal floc formation will start to occur, resulting in inefficient settling and thus a clear effluent. Here's an example of healthy flocculated bacteria. As you can see, there are floc of variable shapes and sizes with minimal free bacteria present. So, after looking at the size and shape of floc, we further analyze how well oxygen is penetrating into floc, as well as the strength of floc structures. We're able to analyze how well oxygen is penetrating floc by looking at their color using phase contrast. When floc are white or tan, like in the photo on the left, it's an indication that there are healthy levels of oxygen penetration occurring. However, if floc appear dark brown or black, like on the right, it's going to be an indication of poor oxygen penetration, and therefore septic regions are being created within the floc. It's important to analyze oxygen penetration into floc because if floc become oxygen deficient, it can limit their ability to uptake nutrients. The levels of oxygen penetration can also be used as indicators to determine what issues may be present within a plant. For example, if floc are small and not very condensed, we should be seeing white and good oxygen penetration should be occurring. But if these floc are brown, they could be an indication that the DO levels are too low or floc are too dense. And this in turn can result in issues such as poor oxygen penetration. Next, we analyze EPS levels to help determine the strength of floc. In order to do so, we use a black India ink stain. If high levels of EPS are present in floc, more of the India ink is repelled. And this is going to produce a brighter floc under the microscope. When low levels of EPS are present, the floc are going to be less bright. And moderate levels of EPS are going to be the most ideal usually, as problems start to occur if levels are too high or too low, such as sliming or floc disintegration. Sludge age is not only associated with floc formation, but it's also associated with the F to M ratio of a wastewater treatment system. F to M is the ratio of incoming food or influent BOD in comparison to the total number of microorganisms within a treatment plant. If you'd like to calculate the F to M ratio in your plant, we actually have a calculator to do so. So, now that we have covered the basics of sludge age, floc formation, and F to M ratios, we'll look at how they connect, starting with a young sludge age. At a younger sludge age, there will be a relatively low population of bacteria as the growth process is just beginning to occur. We're also going to see high F to M values as we have more proportional food coming into the system in comparison to overall bacterial population. Once the sludge age reaches a relatively healthy range, floc structures will be more ideal and F to M ratios will be healthy. Keep in mind the ideal F to M ratio can vary in every plant. So finding the right ratio within your system will help lead to more efficient nutrient reduction and overall treatment. When the sludge age becomes older, problems will start to occur. If the sludge age is old, bacteria are allowed to continue to grow, thus further reducing available nutrients. With low F to M conditions now present, floc begin to starve. And instead of using the limited available BOD, floc begin to consume EPS. And since EPS aids in holding floc together, these decreasing levels can result in floc disintegration. And then in turn, this disintegration can lead to issues such as high TSS or turbidity. Our overall analysis of floc includes floc size, shape, and structure, as well as oxygen penetration and EPS levels. Knowing this information helps us to determine the overall health of a plant. Now let's move on to metazoa and protozoa. These organisms are more complex and much larger than bacteria, but take up overall less biomass. They're not directly responsible for reducing BOD, but they still have many direct and indirect effects on the biology and health of wastewater. And for an example of how they're more complex, the photo series you see, I was actually lucky enough to witness a rotifer being born, and it was probably the highlight of the best 18 minutes I've had watching that being born. But as you can see how complex that those organisms are, especially with their digestive tracts, that's what takes them a while to grow. But if you see on that circle-looking Cheerio thing, that's a testate amoeba, which we'll talk about later. But that's going to be a protozoa, and as you can see, they even don't look as complex as metazoa. But let's start with protozoa. Protozoa primarily consume free bacteria, as well as bacteria located on the edge of Floc. Through this process, protozoa are able to help produce a clear effluent. The presence of protozoa within a plant are also indicators for sludge age and overall health. We'll start by talking about protozoa associated with a young sludge age. Naked amoebas are a protozoa that produce waves of cytoplasmic movement as their gut contents flow. And this is referred to as pseudopodia or false feet movement. And because of this movement, their shape is frequently changing. As you can see in the photos, they're not going to be the same shape twice. They use their pseudopodia to surround and capture food, and naked amoebas are going to be most dominant in a younger sludge age because there are going to be higher concentrations of free bacteria, which is their main food source. If you look at the graph in the upper right, you can see that their abundance increases during periods when high levels of free bacteria are present. If adverse conditions are present, naked amoebas can create a calcified shell, which is also called a test. And once this test is formed, naked amoebas are now referred to as testate amoebas. Testate amoebas, they're similar to naked amoebas, except for their test helps to protect them in the presence of low DO or other adverse conditions like mild toxicity. Therefore, if testate amoebas are observed in your system, it can be an indicator that adverse conditions are present. However, when you see them, it's important to keep in mind other factors, such as in the first photo with the rotifer. Rotifers, if they're present and alive, they're not going to be in toxic systems. So therefore, we can infer that it's a healthy system and it's possible the system was just recovering. But as you can see in the photo on the left, there is actually the pseudopodia coming out, and it's starting to move out of its test to rejoin the healthy bacteria because it does not need that test anymore. Now, flagellates, they have one or more long hair-like tail called a flagellum. And these flagellum are used for movement and to help feeding on dispersed bacteria. Flagellates are unable to compete with bacterial growth, therefore they're primarily found in systems with high F/M and a younger sludge age prior to strong Floc formation occurring, such as you can see in the graph. Flagellates can also be abundant in systems that recently experienced a toxic upset. This is because toxic upsets are usually followed by the rapid growth of free bacteria, meaning an abundance of food for the flagellates. Next, we have swimming ciliates. Swimming ciliates tend to be found within a young to moderate sludge age when free bacteria levels are decreasing. Swimming ciliates are beneficial to a wastewater system as they feed on free bacteria, therefore aiding in keeping a clear effluent. Now that we've touched on the young sludge age, we'll move on to protozoa that are indicative of a healthy but still slightly younger sludge age, starting with crawling ciliates. Crawling ciliates are indicators of a more sustainable sludge age as they primarily consume Floc rather than free bacteria. They're dominant when Floc formation is present, ammonia levels are low, and the pH is around neutral. Crawling ciliates have actually been referred to as the cows of wastewater, as they graze on loosely attached bacteria at the edge of Floc. And just because I'm in Wisconsin, that doesn't mean it's just a Wisconsin thing. I've heard it from other places. But this grazing, it does help them to maintain a more condensed Floc structure. Next, we have stalk ciliates. Stalk ciliates are one of the most important protozoa in wastewater treatment. They use their cilia to create a water current in order to in order to filter food particles, such as free bacteria, algae, or smaller protozoa into their mouth. This type of feeding aids in creating a clear effluent. But if stock ciliates are observed in large colonies, like in the bottom left, it's going to be indication of an older sludge age. The larger the colony, the higher the sludge age. However, as you can see on the diagram, individual stock ciliates and small colonies are going to start to appear in the healthy range. Now, sometimes if stock ciliates are observed with a shell or lorica, such as in the top photo, they can be an indication of mild toxicity or other unfavorable conditions, kind of similar to how a test acts of the tested amoeba. Further indications that toxic conditions are present can be that stock ciliates can detach from their stalks and actually swim away to avoid unfavorable conditions, such as in the photo on the bottom right. You can see how there are a few heads remaining, but most of those stalks don't have one. If succutorans are observed in a wastewater plant, they're typically indicative of a healthy activated sludge system. If attached growths are developing on the stalk of a succutoran, it can act as a gauge for the sludge age. Similar to stock ciliates, the more attached growth, the higher the sludge age. Succutorans come in many shapes and sizes, as you can see in these photos, but they do all have tentacles. And these tentacles, they're used to capture and consume metazoa or protozoa. If they're observed with their tentacles scrunched up though, it's going to be indicative of high levels of ammonia present. Now, in comparison to protozoa, metazoa are more complex, but they're still used as indicators for overall health. They're often associated with higher sludge ages because of their slower growth and development, as I kind of touched on before. So let's look at the metazoa found in healthier sludge ages, going back to the rotifers. Rotifers are a diverse type of metazoa that come in many shapes and sizes, as reflects in the photo. Some rotifers have a funnel-like structure with circles of cilia at the front of their bodies, which resembles rapidly revolving wheels, such as the photo in the far left. Rotifers, they feed on dead and decomposing matter, as well as bacteria, algae, and other small protozoa. This in turn helps produce a clear effluent. All rotifers have a mastoc, such as what the arrow points to in the far top right photo, and this is going to help aid in eating and digestion. And actually, that part fossilizes. In the bottom photo, you can see that there are two mastocs, meaning that this rotifer is likely pregnant. Now, if rotifers are live, they're going to be indicative of a slightly older sludge age, but if they're there and they're dead, they're going to be indicators of toxicity because they're going to be the first to be affected. Next, we have gastrotrichs. They're also indicative of a moderate to old sludge age, but they're not very common, so not a lot is known about them. What we do know is they tend to be observed more frequently in autumn. However, the exact reasons why have yet to be determined. Now, let's move on to metazoa that are associated with a high sludge age. Nematodes are a cylindrical-shaped metazoa that feed on bacteria, fungi, and other nematodes. If nematodes are found in a wastewater plant, they're indicative of an old sludge age. They're also more resilient to mild toxicity or low DO than other metazoa. Next, we have tardigrades or water bears, everyone's favorite. These guys have a plump body with a scrunched up head and 8 legs with 4 claws at the end. These claws are used to rip open their food, such as rotifers, small nematodes, protozoa, and sometimes even other tardigrades. And if tardigrades are present in your system, it's going to indicate that your sludge is very old, but it is stable. Finally, we have bristleworms. Bristleworms prefer high MLSS and low F to M conditions within a very high sludge age. Bristleworms are usually large enough that they can be seen with the naked eye. They normally range from about 300 micrometers to a centimeter. And if you have bristleworms, they can be detrimental to your plant, as they have been known to reduce the MLSS levels by consuming bacteria. And they have a tendency to consume the more younger and healthy bacteria, which then exacerbates the high sludge age related issues that are probably already occurring. So in our analysis, we quantify and identified metazoa and protozoa as they help us determine the sludge age and diagnose possible environmental conditions responsible for their growth. So another aspect we look at when analyzing the samples is the type and abundance of filamentous bacteria present. Filamentous bacteria can be present in every wastewater treatment plant at various levels. At manageable levels, filamentous bacteria can provide structure and support for floc formation. So because of this, some filamentous growth can often be necessary. However, when environments that favor the growth of filaments are present, filaments are allowed to dominate a system and outcompete flocculating bacteria. This in turn can lead to issues such as bulking and foaming. Filaments tend to have distinct characteristics. Therefore, our identification is done largely through appearance. We begin by noting if filaments are growing in the bulk liquid or growing within floc, their abundance, cell shape, and size, and if they're motile or not. As you can see, the photo on the right shows a purple filaments, which are Nostocodia limicola, and those filaments are growing within the floc, versus on the left, those floc are extending from floc and creating interfloc bridging. We use Gram and Neisser stains to definitively identify these filaments because they do have unique staining properties. If bacteria stain Gram or Neisser positive, they're going to be purple, and if they stain Gram negative, they'll be more of a pink, or if they stain Neisser negative, they will be brown. Now that you have a brief overview of why knowing the filament abundance is important, let's move on and look at specific filaments and what they mean. Type 0092 is a Neisser positive filament that can cause bulking to occur if abundant enough. This filament grows within floc and it can interfere with settling properties. However, at low levels, it can help provide strong floc structures. This filament thrives in systems with high levels of fats, oils, and greases or fog, as well as warm temperatures, specifically those above 18 degrees Celsius. If type 0092 is observed, Microthrix parvicella will also be present. This is because both filaments thrive on the same substrate, fog. However, which filament is more abundant will depend on the temperature, because while type 0092 prefers warm temperatures, Microthrix thrives in cold ones. Therefore, as the temperature shifts, so will the more abundant filament. This filament can be identified by its Neisser positive granules, as you can see in the right photo, and when it gram stains, it looks like a thin, tangled spaghetti. Microthrix can not only cause bulking, but it can cause foaming to occur as well. Foaming will occur when Microthrix is abundant enough, but it forms a tangled mat-like structure. With its fatty cell walls, in conjunction with aeration, these structures float, causing foaming. The best way to treat this filament is by removing its favoring condition. This can be achieved through breaking down incoming fog into short-chain fatty acids that are easier for floc-forming bacteria to uptake, which thus allows them to outcompete Microthrix and type 0092. Another foaming filament is nocardia-like organisms, previously referred to as nocardiiforms. Filamentous bacteria that reproduce through fragmentation and contain mycolic acids were previously categorized as nocardiiforms. However, technology was not yet advanced enough to know that this was actually a blanket term for many yet to be identified species. This phylogenetic tree shows now recognized diversity of the filaments that fall under the term nocardiiforms. On this tree, Gordoniase and Nocardiase are the most commonly observed families in wastewater. Both of these filaments exhibit true branching when viewed microscopically. They also thrive in similar conditions and cause the same issues. In fact, these families have an 89 to 98% similarity in DNA. However, Gordoniase and Nocardiase can't be differentiated through light microscopy alone. Rather, 16S rRNA sequencing is required. But this sequencing is not a frequent practice in wastewater, as the same treatment method is effective on both families. So, because of this, these families have been referred to as Gordonia, Gordonia mare, or Nocardia, to name a few. However, these names, they're not interchangeable, so even though the families are very similar, to prevent misnaming a filament, they're now collectively referred to as Nocardia-like organisms, or NALO. Now, similar to Microthrix, NALO can cause foaming to occur when abundant enough. It's important to not use the color of foam as the means to identify what's causing the foam, as it's not a reliable method and it often leads to misidentification and thus improperly treated. Rather, identification should be done microscopically. When microscopically viewing Nalo, they can be identified based on their true branching, as Nalo are the only filaments that exhibit true branching in wastewater. However, some filaments can exhibit false branching, like Spirillous natans / type 1701, which will be discussed later on. In conjunction with foaming, Nalo can also cause bulking or high TSS. This is because if Nalo are growing within Floc, Floc will develop more open structures as a result of the Nalo extending from growth. The best way to control Nalo is by removing the edge it has over Floc-forming bacteria. Nalo thrive in systems with high levels of fog and a high sludge age. Therefore, by increasing wasting as well as helping break down the incoming fog into short-chain fatty acids that the Floc formers can more easily uptake, it gives them the leg up that they need to better outcompete Nalo. If Nalo is concentrated within your foam, however, mechanical removal is a good option as well to help speed up the treatment process, as long as that foam is hauled off site and it doesn't get recirculated back into your plant. Chlorinating is not a recommended way to treat this filament, as it will only cause them to fragment. Once the levels of chlorine have dissipated, fragments are going to start quickly regrowing, and because there are now more fragments present, foaming is going to be even worse than it was before. The only way chlorination could be effective in controlling these filaments is if heavily dosed. However, the dose rate required is so high that it would subsequently eliminate the healthy desired bacterial population within a plant. Commonly observed in systems with an abundance of Nalo are type 00410675. This is because Nalo have the ability to rapidly uptake BOD, which in turn creates the ideal low F to M conditions for type 00410675 to grow. Type 0041 and type 0675 tend to be grouped together as they have a very similar appearance and thrive in the same conditions. These filaments rarely cause issues, and they're more so of indicators to possible low F to M conditions. However, on rare occasions, they can cause bulking to occur. These filaments can be beneficial in providing a strong Floc structure when at low levels. Type 00410675 can have attached growth, which actually can be used to gauge their growth rate. If these filaments are observed without attached growth, it indicates that they grew rapidly. However, if attached growth are observed, it means they've been in the system for a while. Similar to type 00410675 is type 1851. Type 1851 also thrives in low F to M conditions, can be present in systems with an abundance of Nalo, and are beneficial to Floc formation if at low enough levels. Like type 00410675, type 1851 can have attached growth. However, type 1851 is thinner and has the ability to form bundles. Type 1851 acts as an indicator to low F to M conditions, but it also can occasionally lead to bulking. The best way to treat this filament is by correcting the low F to M conditions through increasing wasting. Next, we have Spirillous natans / type 1701. These guys are gram and Neisser negative filaments with sausage or rod-shaped cells. As mentioned before, these filaments can have false branching. The photo on the left shows how the cells are more so leaning against each other versus being truly connected. S. natans and type 1701 tend to be grouped together as they have similar characteristics and appear in similar plant conditions. The main difference between the two is that S. natans tend to be slightly thicker than type 1701. These filaments can cause bulking to occur even if the cells are dead, and this is because S. natans type 1701 have difficult to degrade sheaths. And if cells are dead or missing in these sheaths, it can imply that the filament may not be actively growing within your plant. S. natans / type 1701 can actually grow in sewer lines upstream from a wastewater plant and can be washed in, usually due to an increase in flow rate. If cells are intact, that means they're likely growing within your plant and they favor conditions with low DO or high BOD. It's important to identify the source and health of these filaments in order to treat them properly. Wasting is not going to be an effective treatment against these filaments, as they can anchor to surfaces, making them difficult to remove. But if the filaments are dead, wasting can be an effective way to remove the sheaths. Another bulking filament is Thiothrix. Thiothrix thrives in systems that have low levels of dissolved oxygen, and it's categorized into two different groups, Thiothrix 1 and Thiothrix 2. The main difference being Thiothrix 1 is slightly wider. Because of this and their shared genus, these filaments are usually grouped together. Thiothrix has square to rectangular shaped cells that can store sulfur granules. However, they may not always have them, making identification a little more difficult. Type 021N is a thick filament that can cause bulking to occur if abundant enough. This filament is thought to fit into the Thiothrix genus. However, type 021N doesn't readily store sulfur granules, and it's more closely associated with nitrogen-deficient conditions, but similar to Thiothrix, it also does prefer low DO. This filament, it can be identified and differentiated from Thiothrix by its disc-shaped cells when viewed under 1000x magnification. Veggiatoa is one of the few modal filaments in wastewater. This filament uptakes sulfur and stores it as granules that can be viewed using phase contrast. Veggiatoa typically doesn't cause issues within a plant, but it can indicate the presence of reduced sulfur compounds, which is usually associated with low dissolved oxygen. This filament normally doesn't need to be treated, but the low DO conditions that are causing its growth should be addressed, as low DO can lead to other issues. Another indicator of low DO is Helicobacter hydrosis. H. hydrosis is a gram-and-nizer negative filament that is very thin, rigid, and it resembles a toothpick. This filament can be found in healthy systems at low levels. However, if abundant enough, they can indicate that low DO is present, and they can also occasionally lead to bulking. Finally, we have Nostocodia limicola. And limicola is separated into 3 different classifications, but they're not well-defined filaments. However, based on these filaments' significantly different morphology, they may not even be closely related at all. And limicola 1 has cells that are oval to spherical in shape and range from 0.6 to 0.7 micrometers in diameter. And limicola 2 has cells that are also oval to spherical, but the cells have a diameter of 1 to 1.2 micrometers. Finally, limicola 3 has cells that are approximately 1.5 micrometers in diameter that are spherical to disc-shaped. These filaments stain gram and nizer positive, however their strength can vary. If abundant enough, these filaments have been known to cause bulking in a thin scum layer. And limicola is typically observed in conditions with volatile acids and possible nutrient deficiencies. However, the environmental conditions are not all defined and can potentially differ between all 3. Because of this, additional observations from a sample are needed in order to determine the most effective treatment for these filaments. After filamentous identification and estimation of abundance, we're able to determine the environmental conditions present and what is responsible for their growth. Using this information, we're then able to determine a solution to the problems filaments may be causing. A poll should be popping up. Have you had any issues with these filaments in the past? As I suspected, the answer is mostly yes so far. So, to learn what products we have to help treat these filaments, or if you want to learn more about the metazoa, protozoa, and other filaments that we talked about today, you can access our easy-to-use database. When accessing our database, you will be led to a screen with thumbnails for each organism. And for easier navigation, our database has been organized into specific groups, starting with Filamentous Bacteria. Once you click on a thumbnail, it will bring you to a page dedicated to that specific filament, in this case, type 0092. The page will consist of ways to identify the specific filament. There will be other photos showing what it looks like when it's stained or under other views, and a section explaining why they may be present in your system. Scrolling further down, the page also includes what a filament could do to your plant, potential treatment options, as well as a more detailed description of the filament. The next section in our database are metazoa and protozoa. Our protozoa and metazoa pages will have the same content as our filaments. However, these pages can also contain videos. For example, the video on our stalk ciliate page shows how some stalk ciliates have the ability to contract their stalk in order to aid in feeding. Our microorganism database not only includes descriptions of protozoa, metazoa, and filaments, but also we have plants, algae, and other common organisms found in wastewater plants. At Aquafix, we focus on treating the root cause of a problem, not just the symptoms. We perform comprehensive microanalysis by using, but not limited to, a microscope with different objectives, bright field, phase contrast, and dark field, glass slides and cover slips, as well as India ink, gram, and Neisser stains. Using this equipment, we're able to analyze the bacteria, protozoa, metazoa, filaments, and the sludge age within a plant. With these findings, we're able to provide the most effective treatment recommendations that are specifically tailored to your individual plant. If you'd like to utilize our microscopic analysis and filament identification services, whether there be a problem occurring or if you'd just like to establish a baseline, here's what you can expect. You'll receive a cooler for return shipping that will contain 4 sterile sample bottles, a bag for them, a liner for ice, and a form with details about the samples being sent in. It's important that the samples are sent overnight and on ice in order to get the most reliable representation of your plant. Once our lab receives the samples, we'll conduct detailed observations and generate a report based on our findings. This report will then be sent electronically as well as in the mail. After receiving your report, a call with a technical representative from your state can be set up to discuss the report and treatment specifics, as well as address any potential questions you may have. Here's an example of what our reports look like. We provide photos from each sample taken during our analysis with captions detailing their significance, starting with Floc and Floc structure, any metazoa or protozoa present, oxygen penetration, EPS, filamentous bacteria. A summary is then provided detailing the condition of your plant health and addressing any concerns that are present and why they may be present. The summary also provides a recap and the interpretations to the captions from the photos above. Your approximate sludge age will be discussed in the summary, but it'll also be displayed on a diagram like the one that was referenced today. If any filaments are present within your system, we'll also have a reference table for their abundance and their cause, followed by a more detailed description of them and what conditions are likely triggering their presence in your plant. And then finally, we will provide treatment recommendations that are best suited for your plant. A few key points to take away from today's webinar is that wastewater treatment is a biological process. Every wastewater plant is different. Therefore, analyzing your plant-specific microbiology during an upset, but also when healthy, allows for a better understanding of your plant's performance. Not only knowing, but also understanding your plant's microbiology is important in accurately and optimally diagnosing, treating, and running your unique plant. Let's use microbiology to treat the root cause of your problems, not just the symptoms. Thank you for joining me in our webinar today. Are there any questions? So the microscope that we use, it's a Nikon, and we have the 4x objective, 10x, 60, 40, and 100. And we use phase contrast with the 10 and 40 to help to get a better look at the floc. So algae does not necessarily reflect within sludge age, and there are going to be different conditions that favor their growth. If you access our database, they'll actually have the photos and causes for specific algae, but usually it's not necessarily associated with sludge age. So you can have a small presence of, quote, bad bugs and still have a healthy sludge age, because every plant runs slightly differently. So some may be running more optimally at a higher age versus a lower age. So it all is plant dependent, but problems will occur and increasing wasting should be done if there is a lot of them. But a small amount, it's something to keep in mind when we do our observations to see if, okay, are there other signs that it truly is a problem, or are they just there? So it all depends on context clues and other information, but usually a small amount isn't always bad. So for identifying flagellates, these guys can be rather small, so sometimes 40 or 100x is needed. Personally, how I identify them, if I can see that tail, and usually they move in kind of a They have a distinct movement pattern, but I'd say the main thing to look for is that tail. Having fungus in your plant, that usually can be associated with issues with pH. However, I would say to reach out and talk with a technical rep or to get a little more specifics of your plant to make sure that that is the reason, but usually it has something to do with pH. For the conditions that favor algae growth, that, as I mentioned before, it can slightly vary, but usually if there is a lot of sunlight, direct light, that can help with the growth. But again, that'd be another thing that can be slightly varying. For the SBR, it's best to have kind of a composite, but I want to thank you all again for attending, and I hope everyone has a great day.